What about the future of conservatism? We've gone over constitutional, economic conservatism, social conservatism, and foreign policy conservatism. They've met with differing degrees of success in American politics. I believe, however, that the future of conservatism hinges on growing and sustaining those subsidiary institutions. You know, that word that was mentioned by Paul Mulray of the Clinton campaign, those institutions from which conservative thought most naturally arises. So let me just say that again. I cut myself off. I believe that the future of conservatism hinges on growing and sustaining those subsidiary institutions from which conservative thought most naturally arises. That is to say, those institutions those entities that neither refer to the individual nor the state. Those institutions such as churches, families, civic organizations, private schools, and so forth. But in order to do that, conservatives have to make it their project to do two things. One, limit the size of the administrative state, and two, offer a principled defense of traditional liberal ideas of freedom of speech and association. As we've seen over the past decade or so, the most egregious violations of individual liberty do not come from specific pieces of legislation offered by Congress or states or municipalities, but rather from regulations issued by unelected administrative agencies. Consider the following examples. The problems with the HHS mandate for closely held businesses and religious organizations like the Sisters of the Poor, Hobby Lobby, and so forth, did not arise from anything in the text of the Affordable Care Act. In fact, when I teach religion and the law, which actually I will be teaching this spring at the University of Colorado in the political science department. I teach it at Baylor, which is my permanent appointment every other year. Recently, when I taught it last time, I asked my students to find in the Affordable Care Act where the mandate is, the contraceptive mandate. They couldn't find it because it's not there. Why did it become such an issue? Rather, it arose from a letter issued by the HHS secretary as a consequence of powers given to her by the ACA. Essentially, Congress gave her the power to make laws, enforce them, and fine those who violated them. This is something that's been going on for quite some time. It's just not unique to this particular issue, but it is unique in the sense that you've never seen anything quite like it when it comes to religious liberty. It's an example I use I have a new book that just came out called Taking Rites Seriously. I have a whole chapter on the HHS mandate. By the way, it's rights, it's R-I-T-E-S, the title of the book, Taking Rites Seriously. It's a play on the word R-I-G-H-T-S. I use this illustration. Imagine we had a conservative administration and had a conservative Secretary of Health and Human Services who, reading literature, not by Planned Parenthood, but by the National Rifle Association, came to the conclusion that gun ownership actually decreases crime, and decreased crime helps health. So she then issues a regulation saying that every business must supply their employees with a weapon and ammunition. Now imagine then a Quaker business, a business owned by Quakers, says, you know, we can't pay for this directly. These are instruments of violence. We're pacifists. Now, whenever I've used that illustration, everyone goes, yeah, of course that's wrong, right? Even if, let's say, the statistics, in fact, do prove that. It's irrelevant. A person's individual liberty shouldn't be dependent on whether they should be forced to assist others, right? But in any event, this is what happened. We had the HHS secretary issuing this with the power to not only issue the law, but enforce it and fine those who violate it. The Departments of Justice and Education can, without the direct approval of America's law-making body, Congress, interpret Title IX so that private institutions receiving any level of federal funding must conform to a particular set of beliefs and practices, even if in violation of the institution's long-held mission. The IRS has the power to assess whether a nonprofit organization, such as a school or a church, has violated public policy, and thus should have its nonprofit status revoked. It's easy to imagine a future Department of Education in collusion with the IRS deciding, for example, that Colorado Christian University's requirement that students and faculty practice Christian morality in their private and public lives violates not only Title IX, but also the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. We can, of course, cite other examples from any number of the alphabet agencies that dominate our federal system. But the point is this: conservatives ignore at their own peril the growing administrative state and its power to limit and eliminate the institutions by which conservatives have traditionally communicated their ideas to the wider public. As we have seen over the past decade or so, traditional liberal understandings of freedom of speech and association have fallen on hard times. With the prevalence and pervasiveness, that's a tough one, pervasiveness of speech codes on public university campuses and the use of private corporations and social media to silence dissent against those who have the temerity to challenge progressive ideas, conservatives should be in the forefront of defending what I like to call rock-ribbed liberalism. It was your daddy's liberalism, the sort whose champions would say something like this. I'm going to quote from three people, and I'll tell you who they are after I quote each one. Quote, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power to be justified in silencing mankind," unquote. That's John Stuart Mill, the great 19th century liberal philosopher who served in Parliament. Or this: "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not now occur to us." It's Justice Robert Jackson, 1943. Justice Jackson, some of you know, was the lead attorney for the Allied powers at the Nuremberg trial, where he offered an eloquent defense of why, or an eloquent case of why it was appropriate for the victors in that war to prosecute the Nazis. Or even this: "But what I am suggesting is this." Let me begin, quote, "But what I am suggesting is this: secularists are wrong when they ask believers to leave their religion at the door before entering into the public square. Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, William Jennings Bryan, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Indeed, the majority of great reformers in American history were not only motivated by faith, but repeatedly used religious language to argue for their cause. So to say that men and women should not inject their personal morality into public policy debates is a practical absurdity. Our law is by definition a codification of morality, much of it grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition." Senator Barack Obama, 2006. Driving this liberalism was true tolerance, not the thaw tolerance that is really just the old moralistic intolerance with a better marketing team, anti-religious inclinations, and far more political and bureaucratic power. In the old days, before social media's instrumentalizing and tacit approval of the once rightly condemned peer pressure. Remember that? Don't fall to peer pressure. Now it's like, how many likes do I have? You know, it's like peer pressure now has become good. When did that happen? Your parents or your teachers or both would give you some pointers on how to manage your reflexes and navigate your thoughts in a free and open society. I know that not everyone's parents were rock-ribbed liberals like mine, but I can't help you with that. This would usually happen after you complained or whined about hearing, seeing, or reading something that challenged your deeply held beliefs or forced you to think in ways that were uncomfortable and disorienting. They would say something like this: "Little Francis," assuming that's your name, "one of the great things about living in a free and open society is that you have no choice but to understand and learn from those with whom you disagree. This is great for at least 4 reasons. First, the other guy may have the truth, and by engaging him, you have an opportunity to acquire it. Second, the other guy may not have the truth, but by confronting his challenges, you will have learned to better appreciate and understand your own beliefs and what justifies them. Third, you may have the truth, And thus, when the other guy engages you, he has the opportunity to become more intellectually virtuous while making you a better friend because you've assisted him in acquiring the truth. Fourth, neither of you may have the full truth, but by dialoguing with each other, you may each have to adjust your beliefs, and as a consequence, not only draw closer to the truth, you draw closer to each other." Unquote. This rock-ribbed liberalism is being quickly replaced by a faint-hearted liberalism, whose advocates reject the core principles of rock-ribbed liberalism, the pursuit of truth and the presumption of liberty, and seek to replace them with the sovereignty of identity and the supreme blessedness of affirmation, euphemistically called dignity. Consider as an example what happened at Emory University in March of this year. Emory, like many schools such as Baylor and the University of Colorado, allows students to write messages in chalk on its sidewalks. Sometimes it is used to exercise political speech, as it was on the Emory campus, when someone chalked in large letters several phrases including "Trump 2016, vote Trump, and accept the inevitable." They were all on campus. Apparently, 40 to 50 Emory students were so emotionally scarred by the sight of the chalked inscription that they publicly protested against the graffiti's very existence. Because Mr. Trump's harsh positions on immigration, especially on Muslim immigration, many of the students claimed that the chalked inscriptions were intended to be divisive and thus contrary to the welcoming inclusiveness to which Emory aspires. According to a Washington Post account, the protesting students shouted, "You are not listening. Come speak to us. We are in pain." The student newspaper, the Emory Wheel, reports one student saying that her, quote, "first reaction to the chalking was one of fear." But she notes, "I told myself that it was a prank and that the responsible individual was probably laughing in their room. I told myself that Emory would do something about it," unquote. Although I certainly share the students' rejection of Mr. Trump's politics, their displays of emotional outrage and the language they have used to propagate them are deleterious to the primary purpose of a university, the pursuit of truth. Even more importantly, such displays ignore a simple Christian and human insight. Truth in this world is hardly ever safe. For the appeal to offense changes the question that should be assessed by members of that academic community. And what's the appropriate question? That is, the question should involve the grounds of the wrongness or rightness of Mr. Trump's views and the quality of his character. Instead, claiming offense exacerbates an aspect of our common nature that often impedes our ability to think clearly and carefully when untethered from our rational faculties. And here I'm going to use some ancient words, our concupiscible and irascible appetites. That is, those are the things that our reason is supposed to master, not acquiesce to. Unfortunately, Emory's president, James Wagner, did not seek to put these appetites in their proper place by showing his students how the passions, though not in themselves bad, must be subdued and harnessed by reason in order to have even a fighting chance of acquiring the truth. The pursuit of truth, however, doesn't even make a cameo appearance in his comments. This is what he states, quote, "During our conversation, the protesting students voiced their genuine concern and pain in the face of this perceived intimidation. After meeting with our students, I cannot dismiss their expression of feelings and concern as motivated only by political preference or oversensitivity. Instead, the students with whom I spoke heard a message, not about political process or candidate choice, but instead about values regarding diversity and respect that clash with Emory's own," unquote. To be sure, President Wagner affirms that, quote, "as an academic community, we must value and encourage the expression of ideas, vigorous debate, speech, dissent, and protest," unquote. But then he says in the next sentence, "At the same time, our commitment to respect, civility, and inclusion calls us to provide a safe environment that inspires and supports courageous inquiry," unquote. But here's the problem. A safe environment does not inspire courage, let alone an expression of ideas, vigorous debate, speech, dissent, and protest, unless these happen to be consistent with the prevailing campus orthodoxy. As we know from experience, institutionalizing the philosophy of safe spaces winds up rewarding ideological conformity while empowering the most vocal and active members of the community to marginalize and shame those they think are responsible for a perceived intimidation. What results, paradoxically, is an environment seemingly safe only for those who both conform to the campus's socio-political hegemony and want to be insulated from encountering ideas that may make them feel uncomfortable, but unsafe for those who believe that the primary purpose of a university is the pursuit of truth. For sometimes this pursuit leads certain members of the academic community to embrace and defend beliefs that clash with their own school's socio-political hegemony. I say seemingly safe because when you think about it, the advocates of safe spaces are really harming themselves. Consider this example. A few years ago, a young African-American man at Northwestern University refused to perform a piece of choral music assigned by his professor. His reason? The piece was based on the poetry of Walt Whitman, who was undoubtedly a racist. Here's what I published online in response to that student. Quote, "You do yourself no good by not seeing the greatness in even people who have held disreputable ideas. To look at Walt Whitman and just see a racist is precisely what makes racism wrong. You don't see the entire person in all his complexities, virtues, and foibles. You just see the race. By doing this, you artificially flatten the person, and thus you literally lie to yourself, for you intentionally deny the truth that a great man can have within him both grandeur and vice. If you want to be better than Whitman, rid yourself of the habits of mind that in him result in the beliefs that you now find offensive. The ability to separate the wheat from the chaff is a sign of intellectual maturity. Thus, discarding the wheat because you can't bear the chaff does not punish Mr. Whitman, it punishes you." Unquote. This is why the pursuit of truth rarely flourishes in safe spaces. It is often said that politics exists downstream from culture. If so, then the future of conservatism cannot lie exclusively in the quality of its ideas and arguments, though that is certainly important. Rather, it lies in the vitality of the institutions from which these ideas and arguments arise. So if conservatism is to flourish and contribute to America's political conversation, its adherents have to find ways to limit the scope of the administrative state, as well as to re-argue the case for the rock-ribbed liberalism that was once taken for granted as essential to American constitutional democracy. Thank you.